The system had known nothing but war for 40 years. Three great powers had fought and bled across its stars, until the very darkness of space seemed stained with the memory of death. The Dominion with their massive dreadnoughts, the Collective with their swift hunter packs, and the Republic with their fortress carriers had turned this region into a graveyard of ships and dreams. Whole worlds had burned. Entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but conflict. And on this day, like every day before it, thousands of warships faced each other with weapons hot and hatred burning in the hearts of their crews. Commander Nora stood at her station aboard the USS Defiant and watched the tactical display with growing concern. The battle unfolding in the system was massive even by galactic standards. She counted over 3,000 vessels engaged in combat, their weapons lighting up the void like angry fireflies. Energy beams crossed the darkness. Missiles streaked between formations. Ships died in brilliant explosions that lasted only seconds before the cold vacuum swallowed their light. None of this was humanity's concern. Earth had declared neutrality in the Galactic War decades ago, and the great powers had been content to ignore the young species from the spiral arm. Humans were newcomers to the stars, after all. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. Their fleet was small, their territory limited, and their reputation largely unknown. But that was about to change. Captain Grant stepped onto the bridge with a cup of coffee in his hand and exhaustion in his eyes. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with gray hair cut short and a face that carried the weight of difficult decisions. He had commanded the Defiant for 3 years now, guiding humanity's most advanced battleship through peacekeeping missions and exploration voyages. Nothing in his career had prepared him for what the communications officer had just reported. A distress signal, the officer had said, coming from a neutral trading station caught between the fleets. Thousands of civilians from dozens of species trapped aboard a facility that was taking stray fire from all sides. Grant sipped his coffee and studied the tactical display. The station was a small dot of white surrounded by angry red and orange markers. It had maybe an hour before a direct hit destroyed it completely, maybe less. Commander turned to face him. Her dark skin was illuminated by the glow of her console, and her expression was carefully neutral. She had served with Grant long enough to know what he was thinking, and she had concerns. "Sir," she said quietly, "our orders are clear. We are to avoid entanglement in the Galactic War. High Command was very specific about this." Grant nodded slowly. He understood the politics. Humanity could not afford to make enemies of any of the three great powers. Their survival as a species might depend on remaining invisible, on being too small and too unimportant to notice. Responding to that distress signal would put the Defiant directly in the middle of a battle between civilizations that had been killing each other for longer than humans had possessed electricity. "How many civilians?" Grant asked. Checked her data. "Approximately 12,000, she replied. "Mostly traders and refugees, some children." Grant closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about the orders he had been given and the oath he had sworn. He thought about his own children back on Earth, safe and warm and completely unaware of the horror unfolding in this distant system. He thought about what kind of species humanity wanted to be in this vast and dangerous galaxy. "Helm," he said, "set course for the trading station. Maximum speed." The bridge went quiet. Every officer turned to look at their captain with expressions ranging from surprise to concern to something that might have been pride. Commander simply nodded and began preparing tactical assessments. She had known he would make this choice. It was why she followed him. The Defiant was not the largest ship in the galaxy. She was not the most heavily armed or the fastest or the most advanced, but she was something special all the same. Her hull was built from materials that could withstand punishment that would tear other vessels apart. Her weapons were precise and devastating. Her crew was trained to a standard that few other species could match. And her captain was a man who believed that strength meant nothing without the courage to use it for good. The battleship accelerated toward the system, her engines burning bright against the stars. Lieutenant ran final checks on the weapons systems. He was young for his position, barely 30, but he had proven himself in a dozen engagements against pirates and raiders. His hands were steady as he armed the main batteries and brought the point defense grid online. He hoped they would not have to fire a single shot. He prepared as if they would have to fire 10,000. Dr. Shaw received word of their destination in the medical bay and immediately began preparing for mass casualties. She was a small woman with gentle hands and a core of steel that had seen her through some of the worst disasters humanity had ever faced. She called her staff together and explained what they were flying into. Nobody complained. Nobody asked to be excused. They simply got to work. The Defiant crossed the boundary into the system at 1400 hours, ship time. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for centuries. The moment the human battleship appeared on sensors, every gun in the system stopped firing. The dreadnoughts ceased their bombardment. The hunters broke off their attack runs. The carriers recalled their fighter wings. 3,000 warships, locked in mortal combat just seconds before, went completely still. Communications channels that had been filled with battle commands and death cries fell silent. Tactical officers across 3 fleets stared at their displays in disbelief. Commanders demanded confirmation of what their sensors were telling them. A human ship. Here. Now. Captain Grant watched the silence spread across the battlefield like a wave. He had expected surprise. He had expected confusion. He had not expected this absolute stillness, this sudden and total cessation of hostilities that had nothing to do with peace. Commander pulled up historical data from intercepted alien transmissions, and what she found made her blood run cold. Humanity was not unknown to the galaxy. Humanity was feared. Scattered encounters over the past century had painted humans as something terrible in the minds of alien civilizations. They called them creatures from a planet so harsh and violent that its children were born with the survival instincts of monsters. Stories spread from species to species, growing darker with each telling. Humans who fought through wounds that would kill any other being. Humans who never surrendered, never retreated, never stopped until they or their enemies were dead. Humans who smiled while they killed. The 3 great powers had been so busy fighting each other that they had ignored the sleeping giant in the spiral arm. Now that giant had awakened and walked into their war. On the bridge of the Defiant, Captain Grant felt the weight of a galaxy's fear pressing down upon him. He had come to save lives. The aliens saw only a predator entering their territory. The silence stretched on. Then slowly the fleets began to move, not toward each other, toward the Defiant. 3,000 warships repositioning to face a single enemy, the common enemy they had not known they shared. Grant set down his coffee cup and straightened his uniform. Well, he said quietly, this is going to be interesting. The bridge of the USS Defiant hummed with tension as 3,000 alien warships slowly surrounded them. Captain Grant stood perfectly still, his eyes moving across the tactical display as red and orange markers formed a sphere of death around his vessel. The trading station hung nearby, damaged and bleeding atmosphere, its 12,000 souls waiting for rescue that might never come. Commander Nora worked her console with focused intensity, pulling together every scrap of information they had about the 3 civilizations now pointing their weapons at humanity's flagship. They were reptilian, cold-blooded in both body and temperament, their society built on strength and dominance. They were, their collective minds working in perfect harmony, their warriors utterly fearless because they saw death as simply returning to the whole. They were mammalian like humans, but their culture prized logic above emotion, calculation above instinct. 3 species that had nothing in common except their hatred for each other, and now, apparently, their fear of humanity. Sir, Lieutenant reported from the weapons station, I am counting over 600 targeting locks on our hull. Every ship out there has at least 1 gun pointed at us. Grant nodded slowly. He had expected as much. Open a channel, he said, all frequencies, let them hear what we have to say. The communications officer made the necessary adjustments, and Grant stepped forward to speak. His voice was calm and clear as it broadcast across the battlefield. This is Captain Grant of the USS Defiant. We have responded to a distress signal from the neutral trading station. We are here to render humanitarian assistance and evacuate civilians. We have no hostile intentions toward any vessel present. Please respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Grant waited, watching the tactical display, hoping that someone among the thousands of alien commanders would be willing to talk. The seconds stretched into minutes. Then finally, a response came. It was not the response he had hoped for. The message arrived on all channels simultaneously, and it was clear that all 3 fleets had coordinated their reply. A synthesized voice, cold and mechanical, delivered the demand. Human vessel, you will power down your weapons and surrender your ship immediately. You will withdraw from galactic affairs and return to your. Any failure to comply will result in your destruction. You have 10 minutes. Grant let out a slow breath. Behind him, he could hear his crew shifting uneasily at their stations. They were good people, brave people, but they were also smart enough to know that the Defiant could not survive a battle against 3,000 warships. They had come here to save lives, and now it seemed they might lose their own. Commander approached the captain and spoke quietly so that only he could hear. "Sir, I have been analyzing their communications. I think I understand what is happening here." She pulled up a series of documents on her personal tablet and showed them to Grant. "These are historical records from alien archives," she explained. "Reports and stories about human encounters over the past 100 years. They paint a very specific picture." Grant read the excerpts with growing disbelief. A human freighter crew that fought off a pirate attack despite being outnumbered 10 to 1, killing every raider and losing only 2 of their own. A human explorer who survived alone on a hostile world for 3 years, hunting the native predators for food. A human soldier who continued fighting with a wound that should have been instantly fatal, completing her mission before finally allowing herself to die. To human eyes, these were stories of courage and determination. To alien eyes, they were horror stories. Tales of monsters who could not be stopped, could not be reasoned with, could not be killed by any normal means. "They think we are predators," said quietly. "Apex killers from a death world. They believe that if they show any weakness, we will destroy them." Grant understood now why the battlefield had fallen silent when the Defiant arrived. It was not respect that had stopped the fighting. It was terror. 3 civilizations that had been trying to kill each other for 40 years had suddenly found something they feared more than they hated their enemies. "Sir," reported, "the alien fleets are moving into attack formation. I am reading weapon charges across all vessels." Grant made his decision quickly. He had 10 minutes to change the minds of 3,000 commanders who believed he was a monster. Words alone would not be enough. He needed to show them something they did not expect. "Helm," he said, "move us forward. Position the Defiant between the fleets and the trading station." The helmsman hesitated for just a moment then. The great battleship accelerated through the void, sliding past alien warships that tracked her movement with hungry sensors. Grant could imagine the confusion spreading through the enemy ranks. The human ship was not running. It was not preparing to attack. It was moving to protect. The Defiant settled into position directly in front of the damaged station. Any attack on the civilian facility would now have to go through the human battleship first. "Reopen the channel," Grant ordered. The communications officer nodded, and Grant spoke again to the assembled fleets. "This is Captain Grant. We understand your concerns about our presence here. We know what you believe about humanity, but you are wrong. We did not come here to fight. We came here because 12,000 innocent people are dying on that station behind us, and we could not ignore their call for help. You may believe that humans are monsters. We are here to prove otherwise. We will not fire unless fired upon. We will not leave until those civilians are safe. Judge us by our actions, not by your fears." The response came faster this time, and it was not the unified voice of before. It was a single commander, his reptilian features twisted with contempt. "Pretty words, human, but words mean nothing. You are weak. You have no allies. You stand alone against the might of 3 empires. Surrender or die." Grant smiled sadly. He had hoped for more time. He had hoped that someone among the aliens would see reason. Then, without warning, a flash of light erupted from one of the dreadnoughts. A plasma beam streaked across the void, passing close enough to the Defiant that her shields flared briefly with the heat of its passage. The shot had missed deliberately, a warning and a provocation. "Sir," reported, his voice tight with controlled anger, "that was a ranging shot. They are testing our response." Grant kept his hands clasped behind his back. "Do not return fire." The bridge crew exchanged glances, but nobody questioned the order. They trusted their captain, even when his command seemed like madness. Another shot came, this time from a vessel on the opposite side of the formation. Then another from a ship. The aliens were prodding the human battleship, trying to provoke a response that would justify the destruction they so desperately wanted to unleash. The Defiant did not fire back. She did not move. She simply held her position, shields absorbing each glancing blow, her weapons cold and silent. On the bridge, Dr. Shaw arrived from the medical bay with a report. "Captain," she said, "I have been monitoring communications from the trading station. They are running out of time. Life support is failing on 3 decks. They need evacuation within the hour." Grant nodded. He looked at the tactical display, at the wall of hostile ships surrounding them, at the damaged station filled with innocent lives. He had come here to prove that humanity was more than the monsters the galaxy believed them to be. Now he would have to find a way to save those civilians, while 3 empires tried to kill him. "Commander," he said quietly, "prepare the shuttle crews. We are going to get those people out of there." "Sir," replied, "the moment our shuttles launch, those fleets will open fire." Grant met her eyes. His expression was calm, almost peaceful. "Then we will give them something else to shoot at." The first shot had been a warning, the second was not. A dreadnought from the forward line broke formation and fired its main battery directly at the USS Defiant. The plasma beam struck the battleship's shields with enough force to rock the entire vessel, sending crew members stumbling at their stations. Alarms screamed across the bridge as damage reports flooded in. Captain Grant gripped the railing in front of him and kept his feet. "Shields," he demanded. "Holding at 60%, Commander Nora reported. Her fingers flew across her console as she worked to redistribute power. "That was a direct hit, sir. They are done playing games." The attack had shattered whatever fragile order remained among the alien fleets. Some commanders saw this as the signal they had been waiting for and began powering up their own weapons. Others hesitated, uncertain whether to join the assault or hold back. Still others turned on each other, old hatreds flaring back to life now that the moment of unified fear had passed. The battlefield erupted into chaos. Ships fired on the Defiant, on the trading station, and on each other. The 40-year war had resumed, and humanity was caught in the middle of it. Lieutenant tracked targeting solutions across his display, his hands trembling with the effort of not pressing the fire button. "Sir," he said through clenched teeth, "I have clean shots on the vessels attacking us. Give me the order and I can take out the nearest dreadnought." Grant shook his head. "Negative. We fire only on weapons targeting our shuttles or the station, nothing else." Wanted to argue. Every instinct in his body screamed that they should fight back, that they should show these aliens what human weapons could do. But he was a professional, and his captain had given an order. The Defiant shuddered again as another plasma beam struck her hull. The shields were holding, but they would not hold forever. In the shuttle bay, pilots ran to their craft and began emergency launch procedures. Lieutenant Amy Cole was the first to reach her vessel, a search and rescue shuttle built for speed and maneuverability. She had flown through asteroid fields and solar storms, but she had never faced anything like what waited outside. The bay doors opened, and Cole saw the hell that the system had become. Energy beams crisscrossed the void in every direction. Missiles streaked between ships. Explosions bloomed and faded in the eternal darkness. And somewhere in that chaos, 12,000 people were waiting to die. Cole launched her shuttle and punched the engines to maximum. Behind her, 3 more rescue craft followed. On the bridge, Grant watched the shuttles appear on his tactical display. They were small and fragile, utterly vulnerable in the storm of fire surrounding them. He had sent those pilots out knowing that some of them might not come back. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. "Helm," he said, "all ahead full. Put us between the shuttles and the hostile fire." The Defiant surged forward, her massive engines roaring with power that made the entire ship vibrate. The battleship moved like a living thing, twisting and turning to intercept shots aimed at the rescue craft. Her shields flared again and again as she absorbed punishment meant for smaller vessels. Finally had targets he could engage. A cruiser had locked weapons on Lieutenant Cole's shuttle. He fired the Defiant's point defense batteries, and the cruiser's targeting array vanished in a flash of directed energy. The ship itself was undamaged, but it was blind and helpless. Another vessel, a hunter, moved to intercept the second shuttle, disabled it with a precise shot to its engine housing. The hunter drifted, intact but immobile. Grant had given strict orders. Disable, not destroy. Stop them from killing, but do not become killers themselves. It was a nearly impossible line to walk in the middle of a battle, but the crew of the Defiant walked it with skill born of desperate necessity. Lieutenant Cole reached the trading station and docked at the nearest functional airlock. The hatch opened, and she found herself facing a crowd of terrified civilians. There were and pressed together in a corridor that stank of fear and smoke. Species that had been killing each other for generations, now united only by their desire to survive. "Come on," Cole shouted over the din of alarms. "We are getting you out of here." A male with burn marks on his scales stepped forward. He looked at the human pilot with something strange in his reptilian eyes. "You came for us?" he asked. "Why?" Cole did not have time to explain. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the shuttle. "Because someone had to," she said. "Now move." Back on the Defiant, the situation was growing desperate. The shields had dropped to 30%. Hull breaches had been reported on 3 decks. The medical bay was filling with wounded crew members who had been caught in secondary explosions. Dr. Shaw worked without rest, her gentle hands moving from patient to patient, saving lives with skill and determination. Captain Grant felt the ship shudder beneath him and knew they could not take much more punishment. But the shuttles were still loading civilians. They needed more time. He made a decision that would become legend. "All hands," he announced over the ship-wide communication system. "This is the captain. We are going to draw their fire away from the station. Engineering, I need everything you can give me to the engines. We are going to make some noise." The Defiant turned away from the station and accelerated directly toward the heart of the formation. Her engines burned so hot that sensors across the battlefield registered the energy spike. The ship that had been a shield became a challenge, a taunt, a target too tempting to ignore. They took the bait. Dreadnoughts turned to pursue, their guns blazing. Other vessels joined the chase, drawn by the sight of the human ship seemingly trying to fight its way through their lines. Grant stood at the center of his bridge and conducted the battle like a symphony of chaos. He called out orders in a calm, steady voice, directing his ship through gaps in the enemy formation, using asteroids and debris as cover, always staying just ahead of the killing shots. Lieutenant fired only when absolutely necessary, disabling weapons and engines with surgical precision. He was not fighting to win. He was fighting to survive long enough for those shuttles to finish their work. The minutes stretched into eternity. The Defiant's shields dropped to 20%, then 10%, then failed entirely. Armor plating began to melt under direct hits. Fires broke out on multiple decks. And still the shuttles flew. Still the civilians loaded. Still the crew of the Defiant held the line. Lieutenant Cole made her 5th trip to the station. Her shuttle was damaged, her co-pilot was wounded, and she had not slept in 30 hours. But there were still people waiting, and she was not going to leave them behind. On the bridge, Commander reported that all civilians had been evacuated. The shuttles were returning to the ship. "Get us out of here," Grant ordered. The Defiant broke off her engagement and retreated toward the edge of the system. Behind her, the alien fleets did not pursue. They had expected the human ship to fight, to kill, to prove that the horror stories were true. Instead, the humans had taken terrible punishment to save lives that were not even their own. On the bridge of a carrier, Fleet Commander watched the battered human battleship limp away. She had fought in this war for 20 years. She had seen countless acts of courage and countless acts of cruelty, but she had never seen anything like this. The humans had come as protectors, not predators. They had suffered rather than caused suffering. They had proven every fear wrong. Made a decision that would change the course of history. "Open a channel to the human vessel," she ordered. "I want to speak with their captain." The council chamber of the trading station had been designed for commerce and negotiation. Now it served as neutral ground for something far more significant. Scorch marks decorated the walls, and the air still carried the bitter taste of smoke, but the room was intact enough to hold the most important meeting in galactic history. Captain Grant stood at one end of the long table, his uniform torn and stained with soot from the fires that had burned through his ship. Commander Nora stood beside him, a bandage wrapped around her left arm where a piece of shrapnel had caught her during the battle. They were exhausted and wounded, but they were here. Across from them sat Fleet Commander of the Collective. She was tall for her species, her features sharp and angular, her compound eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. Beside her sat representatives from the Dominion and the Republic, commanders who had been trying to kill each other just hours before. The civilians from the station had been transported to the Defiant, where Dr. Shaw and her medical team were treating the wounded. Lieutenant remained on the bridge, keeping watch over the uneasy ceasefire that had fallen across the system. The guns were silent, but nobody trusted that silence to last. Spoke first. Her voice was strange to human ears, a buzzing quality beneath the words that made them seem to vibrate in the air. "I have fought in this war for 20 years, she said. "I have killed more enemies than I can count. I have lost friends, family, and parts of my own body to this conflict. And in all that time, I have never seen anything like what your ship did today." Grant met her compound eyes without flinching. "We came to help," he said simply. The representative, a massive reptilian named, slammed his fist on the table. "Help," he growled. "You invaded a war zone. You interfered in matters that do not concern your species. You could have started a conflict between humanity and every power in this sector." "We could have," Grant agreed, "but we did not. We came to save lives, and that is what we did. Your species, all of them. We made no distinction between friend and enemy because none of them were our enemies." The representative, a slender female named, tilted her head in a gesture of curiosity. "This is illogical," she said. "You risked your vessel and your crew for beings you had never met. You took damage that could have destroyed you. What did you hope to gain?" Commander stepped forward to answer. "We did not hope to gain anything," she said. "Our captain made a choice based on principle, not profit. Human morality does not always follow logical patterns. We believe that some things are simply right, regardless of the cost." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species is strange," she said. "The stories we have heard painted you as monsters, killers without mercy or conscience. Yet here you stand, wounded and weary, having sacrificed to protect our civilians." Grant nodded slowly. "I know the stories," he said. "I have read them, and I understand why you believe them. Humanity can be terrible when we choose to be. We have a capacity for violence that frightens even ourselves. But that is not all we are. We also have a capacity for compassion, for sacrifice, for love. The same strength that makes us dangerous in battle makes us unwilling to abandon those in need." The chamber fell silent as the alien commanders considered his words. In the corridor outside, refugees from all three species waited nervously for news. A child sat next to an elder, both of them watching a human medic tend to a wounded soldier. They had been enemies their entire lives. Now they were survivors together, bound by the strange mercy of creatures from a distant world. Dr. Shaw moved among them with gentle efficiency, treating wounds and offering comfort in equal measure. She did not speak their languages, but she had learned that kindness needed no translation. A soft touch, a warm blanket, a cup of water offered with a smile. These small gestures bridged gaps that words could not. A young approached her, one of its wings badly damaged in the station's partial decompression. It clicked nervously as Shaw examined the injury. "This will hurt," she said softly, knowing the translation device would convey her meaning. "But I can fix it." The held still as she worked, its compound eyes watching her every movement. When she finished, it reached out with one delicate limb and touched her hand. "Thank you," it said in broken English. "You are not what we expected." Shaw smiled. "Neither are you," she replied. Back in the council chamber, the negotiations had reached a critical point, had proposed something unprecedented. A ceasefire, not just in this system, but across all contested territories. The humans would serve as neutral mediators, helping the three powers find a path toward lasting peace. Was skeptical. "We have been fighting for 40 years, he said. "How can we simply stop?" "You cannot," Grant admitted. "Not immediately. Hatred and fear do not disappear overnight. But you can choose to begin. You can choose to take one step toward peace instead of another step toward war." Consulted a data device in her hand. "The logical analysis suggests that continued conflict will result in mutual destruction within 200 years, she said. "All three powers will exhaust their resources and collapse. Peace is the only mathematically viable path to survival." "Logic alone will not convince my people," growled. "They want revenge for generations of death." Grant leaned forward. "I understand," he said. "My species has fought its own wars, killed its own brothers and sisters over differences that seem meaningless now. We have learned that revenge is a fire that consumes everything, including those who seek it. The only way to break the cycle is to choose something better." The debate continued for hours. Progress came slowly, measured in small concessions and grudging agreements. But it came. For the first time in 40 years, representatives of the three great powers were talking instead of shooting. As the discussions wound down, a message arrived from the Defiant. Lieutenant reported that a fleet element was breaking away from the main formation. Admiral, who had opposed the ceasefire from the beginning, was moving his ships toward the station. "He lost his entire family in an attack 15 years ago," explained. "His hatred runs deeper than logic can reach." Grant checked the tactical update on his personal device. "How many ships does he have?" 47, replied. "Enough to destroy this station and everyone on it." The ceasefire was about to collapse before it had truly begun. Grant looked at the faces around the table, who had taken a chance on peace, who was just beginning to question his certainties, who saw the mathematics of survival but struggled to convince her own people. "We need to stop him," Grant said. Rose from her seat. "My ships will stand with you," she said. Hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "And mine." Grant felt something shift in the room, something that had not existed before. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. Three species who had been killing each other for generations had just agreed to fight side by side. He tapped his communication device. "Prepare the Defiant. We are going to have company." Sir replied, "The ship is barely holding together. Shields are down and half our weapons are offline." Grant looked at the alien commanders who had just become unlikely allies. "Then I guess we will have to make do with what we have," he said, "and with a little help from some new friends." Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the coalition fleet forming in his path. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his heart burned with cold fury. 47 ships under his command, crewed by soldiers who shared his conviction that peace with the enemy was impossible. Behind him lay 40 years of war. Ahead lay the chance to end the ceasefire before it could take root. The coalition that faced him was a strange sight. Hunters flew in formation with dreadnoughts. Cruisers protected carriers, and at the center of it all, battered and but unbowed, flew the USS Defiant. Captain Grant stood on his damaged bridge and watched the enemy fleet approach. The Defiant was in no condition to fight. Her shields were completely gone. Half her weapons were offline. Hull breaches on foredecks had been sealed with emergency patches that might not hold under fire. By any reasonable measure, they should have retreated and let the alien coalition handle this alone. But Grant had not come this far to retreat now. He had asked these species to trust humanity. He had promised them that humans would stand with them in the pursuit of peace. Running away now would prove every fear the galaxy had about his people. Worse, it would be wrong. Commander Nora worked her console with quiet efficiency, coordinating communications between the diverse fleet elements. The language barriers were significant, and the tactical doctrines of three different civilizations had never been designed to work together, but found common ground wherever she could, translating not just words but intentions, building bridges between warriors who had been enemies their entire lives. Lieutenant had performed miracles getting the weapon systems partially restored. He could fire the main batteries at reduced power, and the point defense grid was functioning at 60% capacity. It would have to be enough. In the medical bay, Dr. Shaw had organized the civilian refugees into volunteer teams. Those with medical training helped tend the wounded. Others prepared supplies and cleared space for the casualties that were certain to come. Even the children found ways to help, carrying water and blankets to those in need. The male who had been among the first to board the rescue shuttles now stood guard outside the medical bay, his burned scales a reminder of how close he had come to death. He had asked Shaw why the humans had saved them, and she had told him the truth. Because we could. Because it was right. Because leaving people to die when we had the power to help them was simply not something we were willing to do. He had not understood entirely. His culture valued strength above all else, and mercy was seen as weakness. But watching the humans work, seeing them sacrifice for strangers without expectation of reward, he was beginning to question things he had believed his entire life. On the bridge, Fleet Commander's voice crackled through the communication system. "Human Captain," she said, "Admiral is hailing us. He demands our immediate surrender." Grant nodded to the communications officer, put him through. The flickered and Admiral's face appeared. He was older than Grant had expected, his fur gray with age and stress, his eyes carrying a weight of grief that transcended species. "You have made a terrible mistake," said. "This ceasefire is a fantasy. Peace with those who murdered my family is impossible. I will destroy this station and everyone in it, and when I am done, the war will continue as it should." Grant stepped forward. "Admiral, I understand your pain. I understand your anger. But killing 12,000 civilians will not bring your family back. It will only add more grief to a galaxy already drowning in it." His expression twisted. "What do you know of grief, human? Your species has barely left you have not watched your children burned alive by enemy weapons. You have not buried everyone you ever loved." Grant was silent for a moment. "You are right," he said finally. "I have not experienced what you have experienced. I cannot truly understand the depth of your loss. But I have seen enough death to know that more death is never the answer. I have seen enough war to know that victory means nothing if you destroy everything worth fighting for. Pretty words, spat, but words will not stop me. The communication ended. On the tactical display, the fleet began its attack run. All ships, Grant broadcast to the coalition, engage defensive formation. Protect the station at all costs. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and fought side by side, their commanders calling out warnings and opportunities across newly opened communication channels. Ships that had been shooting at each other hours before now covered each other's flanks, filling gaps and supporting maneuvers with the instincts of veterans. The Defiant led the defense, her remaining weapons firing with desperate precision. Targeted engines and weapon systems, disabling enemy ships without destroying them. Every vessel he crippled was one less that could kill, but also one less crew that had to die. The fleet was smaller than the coalition, but they fought with the fury of true believers. They pressed their attack relentlessly, determined to break through to the station. Explosions bloomed across the void as ships on both sides took damage. A hunter saved a dreadnought from a torpedo spread, sacrificing itself to intercept the weapons. A cruiser extended its shields to protect a damaged carrier. Acts of courage and sacrifice that would have been unthinkable just days before. The Defiant took hit after hit, her hull groaning under the punishment. Grant felt his ship dying around him, systems failing one by one, the lights flickering as power fluctuated. But he did not order a retreat. He could not while there were still people depending on him. Admiral Commander said quietly, pointing to her display, "Flagship is breaking through. Our lines cannot hold." Grant looked at the tactical display and saw the truth. The Admiral's vessel was driving straight toward the station, ignoring the coalition ships trying to stop it. In minutes, it would be in range to fire on the defenseless civilians. He made his decision instantly. "Helm," he ordered, "intercept course. Put us directly in his path." The Defiant lurched forward, her damaged engines screaming in protest. The great battleship threw herself into the gap, placing her broken hull between its flagship and the station. Fired, the blast struck the Defiant amidships, tearing through armor that had already been weakened by hours of combat. The ship shuddered, and for a terrible moment Grant thought they would break apart. But the Defiant held. Somehow, impossibly, she held. Grant opened a channel to his flagship. "You will have to go through us," he said simply. Stared at him through his finger hovered over the command to fire again. One more blast would finish the human ship. One more command would open the path to the station. But he did not give that command. Instead, he looked at the battered vessel blocking his path. He saw the humans who had chosen to die rather than abandon strangers. He saw the coalition fleet fighting together in a way he had never thought possible. He saw everything he believed about the galaxy crumbling around him. "Why?" he asked, his voice suddenly old and tired. "Why would you die for them? They are not your people. This is not your war." Grant smiled sadly. "Because peace has to start somewhere," he said. "Because someone has to be willing to take the first step, even if it hurts, even if it kills us. We choose to be that someone." The silence stretched between them. The guns on both sides fell quiet. And then, slowly, Admiral lowered his hand from the firing controls. "I surrender," he said quietly. "May the gods forgive me for what I have done, and what I was about to do." The battle was over. In the hours that followed, the coalition fleet secured the vessels and began the long process of treating wounded and repairing damage. The civilians on the station were transferred to safe transport ships that would carry them to neutral territory. Representatives from all three species returned to the council chamber to continue the negotiations that Admiral had tried to destroy. Captain Grant supervised the initial damage assessment of the Defiant. The ship would need months of repairs before she could fly again. 17 of his crew had been killed in the battle. Many more were wounded. The cost of this day had been high. But as he walked through the corridors of his broken ship, he saw something that made the cost worthwhile. And in civilians working alongside human crew members, former enemies sharing food and water and stories, children of three species playing together in a cargo bay that had been converted to temporary housing. Dr. Shaw found him standing alone in an observation lounge, watching the stars. "Captain," she said, "you should be resting." Grant shook his head. "I wanted to see it," he said. "I wanted to remember what this looks like." She followed his gaze and saw the coalition fleet floating peacefully in the void. Ships that had been at war for generations now flying in formation together. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "I do not know," Grant admitted. "Peace is harder than war. It takes more courage to forgive than to fight. But I think we gave them a chance. I think we showed them something they had never seen before." "And what was that?" Grant turned to face her. "Hope," he said simply. A month later, the USS Defiant limped home to Earth for repairs. Behind her, she left a galaxy changed. The ceasefire she had helped forge was still fragile, still uncertain, but it held. Negotiations continued. Old wounds began slowly to heal. The stories about humanity changed as well. The tales of human monsters and killers faded, replaced by new stories. Stories of a ship that took fire to protect civilians, of a captain who offered peace to those who feared him, of a species strong enough to fight and wise enough to choose not to. The galaxy had watched humanity's battleship arrive and had expected war. Instead, they had witnessed something that changed everything. Not human weapons or human violence, but human hearts. The silence that fell when the Defiant arrived had been fear. The silence that remained was something else entirely. It was respect, and perhaps in time it would become something more. It would become friendship.